Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us. This morning I'm going to kind of talk about perhaps the ladder of faith, for lack of a better way to explain it, but a process of how we go about developing faith, the steps that we go through in developing faith. And here's the idea behind it. We want to start with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey would tell us in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Start with the end in mind. Where is it that we're trying to get? And how is this process or this path or this journey that we're on, how does it help us to get there? And if we think about this spiritual practice, this technique that we teach called treatment, where we are trying to get, the final step, the last step in the process, is to release. To release and to let go. Another way to say it is to surrender. To surrender. And if you look up the definition of surrender in the dictionary, the one that jumped out at me this morning as applicable to what we're talking about is to cease resisting. To cease resisting. Now I know we would not consciously sit here and say that we're resisting God. Who in their right mind would attempt to do so? But nevertheless, we have to consider that in our consciousness, that which we have not fully accepted, believed, trust in, have faith in, we have not ceased resisting. We have not ceased resisting. So in this process of treatment, this process of affirmative prayer, we go through a method, of getting from what we desire, what we want, to what we have accepted so completely that anything within us that might have rejected it is gone. We no longer resist it. We have surrendered to the inevitableness of God. I love that. Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us that. The inevitableness of God. Can you believe in the inevitableness of God? What power is there in the universe that could possibly stand in God's way? What ideas in the universe, what information, what false knowledge could possibly stand in the way of all knowingness? Where in the universe, where in all of God's creation could we possibly go where God is not? Omnipresence. That's why the scripture says, where am I going to go? If I go to hell and make my bed in hell, you're there with me. It's all God. See, Walter Starkey tells us that. It's all God. The fertilizer and the roses, it is all God. There is no spot where God is not. There is nothing that the divine mind does not know. There is nothing that the divine mind cannot do. And the caveat there is it cannot know anything other than itself. And it cannot do anything to contradict itself. See, we live in a world of apparent opposites, good and bad, yin and yang. But the divine lives in the world of is. It just is. We have to be very cognizant of this as we go about our process of affirmative prayer. We have to be very aware of the fact that we can't speak to God in terms that God cannot understand. If we speak in pain and suffering, we are going there alone because the divine knows nothing of pain and suffering. It did not send us pain and suffering because it thought it was good for us. The sunlight cannot know the darkness. The darkness disappears as the light comes into the room. But there's no place where the light becomes the darkness. There's no place where the light touches the darkness. There's no place where the light knows the darkness. In that metaphor, it only knows light. So we understand as we think of this process of treatment, we understand that what we want to do, we want to get to the last step. And when we get to the last step, we want to completely trust. We want to completely have faith. We want to completely surrender to the fact that this thing that we desire is already done. It is already accomplished. There's nothing more that we ought to do in order to try to make it happen. See, and this is the point I'm getting to. This desire, this human desire, to help the process along, to help God along, you know. And I hear people say this. Well, God helps those who help themselves. So I've got to get the ball rolling, and then I've got to keep pushing it down the hill. See, and we don't. See, if you're at the top of the hill and you let the ball go, gravity will do it. There's a law, an invisible law at work that will do it. If you stand at the top of the Empire State Building and you toss a penny into the air out from the side of the building, it'll go to the ground. You don't have to get on the elevator and quickly hurry down 50 flights and look out the window to see if it's still going. It will go to the ground. When I first moved to North Carolina, you know, growing up in New York City, I knew absolutely nothing about growing a vegetable garden. And of course, the people I worked with were all very practiced in that. I mean, many of them grew enough vegetables in the summertime to freeze or can to last them the whole winter. And they would catch fish and game, and they would have meat. But one lady used to joke, and she would ask me about the Yankee that came down to the South and tried to raise potatoes, but he kept killing them because he was digging them up to see if they were ripe. And of course, all the people who knew how to grow potatoes, they thought that was enormously funny, and I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue what she was talking about. So one day I asked her, I said, I know you're having great sport at my expense. I said, I'm okay with that. I said, but how do you know when potatoes are ripe? And of course she thought that was even funnier than a joke. And she says, well, when the vine dies, that's when you go dig them up, you know. And of course you can go to the hardware store and you can buy a potato fork. It looks kind of like a pitchfork, only the tines are heavier. And you go out in the garden and you dig up your potatoes. So get that image in mind, you know, that somebody goes out and you put your seed potatoes in the ground, you've plowed the soil, you've fertilized the soil, you've watered the soil, you've dug your trench, you go out and you drop your seed potatoes in the ground and you cover them with dirt. And then a few days later you go dig them up to see if they're growing. And what happens? Well, you kill them because they were growing just fine. There was a natural process at work. There was an intelligence in the soil and an intelligence in the potato, albeit a chemical intelligence. But nevertheless, there was something there that knew exactly what to do and how to do it. And if we had ceased resisting, if we had just trusted in that process, if we had truly released and let go of the fact that there's nothing more that I need to do under that ground for the potatoes. I'll water them, I'll hoe the weeds away from them, but the potatoes are being guided in their growth by an intelligence that I know nothing of. I mean, how humbling an experience is that, you know? We can take a potato, we can cut it up in pieces so that each little piece has an eye in it, the seeds, and we can go out and we can drop those seed potatoes in the soil and we can cover them up with dirt and they will produce potatoes for us. And yet we are not smart enough to know how to do that. I could give you all the chemicals in the world and ask you to sit down at a table in a laboratory and create a potato for me. And I think the smartest person in the world couldn't do it. They might create something close, those instant things that we get in the microwave. But they could not create a seed potato that would be capable of going in the ground and producing a vine and producing more potatoes. There is this power in the universe that knows what to do and knows how to do it and is perfectly capable of doing it. It takes the nothingness of the universe and it forms it into energy and into matter and into potatoes and into human bodies and into houses and into automobiles and everything else that is appropriate. And once we do our part, once we plant those seeds, once we do our part, we just have to keep the garden weeded and watered. We don't have to keep digging up the potatoes to try to help it along. So the example I use here is body English, Just a little history of that. In the game of billiards or snookers or pool, as we call pocket billiards here, there's a technique by which you can hit the cue ball off to one side or the other and up high or down low and one side to the other. And depending upon where you hit it and how hard you hit it and how quickly you draw the stick back, you can impart a spin on that ball, on the cue ball. And you can impart a spin on that cue ball that makes it do interesting things. If you've ever seen any of the trick shots in pool on TV, or you can go on YouTube and just Google for trick shots in pool, and you'll see the cue ball does mysterious things. Instead of going perfectly straight, it kind of curves. They can shoot around a ball that's in front of it. They can get the cue ball to shoot around it and come around and hit a ball and put it in the pocket. It'll hit one ball and it'll go off in a certain direction, and it'll hit another ball, or it'll hit a ball and it will start to roll backwards and position itself perfectly for the next shot. All these different things are done by imparting spin on the ball. And in general, we use the term English to describe that. Why they call it English is a matter of debate. The etymology of that is unclear, but nevertheless, that's what they call it. And we carry that over into other things in our lives. And one of the places where it's probably, at least in my memory, is most evident is in bowling. When our kids were little, we had them on a bowling league, and every Saturday we would load them up in the van and we would go to the bowling alley, and they would get their little shoes and they would bowl for a little while, and then they would get their bag of chips and a cold drink, and then they would bowl some more. And if you watch the little ones when they're learning how to bowl, if you watch them, and again, I'm sure you can find some videos on YouTube, they're absolutely precious because they get that ball rolling down the alley and it's going in extreme slow motion. It's just, you can hear the holes in the ball as it turns a whoomp, whoomp. It's just going that slow. And the ball kind of zigzags. It kind of zigzags down the lane, And it's going straight for the pins, and then it's going away from the pins, and it's going back towards the pins, and it's going away from it. But if you watch the little ones with their body, they're standing at the end of that alley, and they're not just watching that ball. They haven't gone back to their seat yet, but they're helping it. You see, they're standing there, and they've got their little hands going one way, and they got their feet going another way, and they're kind of rooting this ball on, And sometimes it's just almost like a miracle. You think that ball is just it's hanging halfway off the edge of the alley, and it looks like it's going to just drop into the gutter, or bump off the bumpers. When the kids were real little, we put bumpers in the gutters so they didn't throw gutter balls. But that ball looks like it's going completely astray, and then miraculously it seems to come back, and it goes right in the pocket, and they get a strike. And they're just absolutely delighted. And of course, they believe that all this pushing and this jiggling and this wiggling and this rooting helped that ball along. This body English, we call that body English. They're putting some body English on the ball. And that term has carried over into our culture. Whenever somebody is kind of gesturing wildly, They're throwing their body English into it. They're trying to make it happen, you know. And if you watch the pros, if you watch the pro bowlers, I was on the bowling team in high school. We went to high school in New York City, so we didn't have a track or an athletic field or anything like that. So basketball was the sport in the gym, and then everybody else did other things. And so I did bowling because we could go to the different bowling alleys and bowl against the other high schools. And at that time, there was a program on Saturday afternoon. ABC, I think it was, used to show lots of different sports on Saturday afternoon. They had the Wide World of Sports, and then they had pro bowlers. And they used to show the bowlers, and I think Earl Anthony was one of the prominent bowlers who was on there, and later he went on to be an announcer. He did commentary. But if you watch the pros in comparison to the children who are trying to help things along, you know, the pros have practice. They have a technique. They have a process that they use. There's little dots on the floor where they stand, and they know which of those dots they need to stand by and how far back or how far in front of that dot they want to be. They've measured their pace, how many steps they're going to take before they get up to the foul line. They've practiced how they're going to stand. They've practiced how they're going to hold the ball. They've practiced how their fingers fit. They've had their balls custom drilled so that their hand just fits it perfectly for their purpose, for their technique. They know when to start. They know when to let the ball come down out from their two hands in front of them. They know how far back to let their arms swing. As they're taking their steps forward, they know when to start their glide on their one foot and bring their other foot behind. And there's little arrows painted on the very edge of the lane, right past the foul lines. And they know exactly where on those, between those arrows, or which arrow to go over. They know exactly where they want that ball to go. They know exactly how much spin they want to put on it, but kind of twisting their wrist as they release the ball, they put a spin on it. And that's a form of English. That's a spin or a rotation on the ball. And as that ball heads down the alley at a certain point in the alley, that spin is going to start to affect its track, and that ball will curve in towards whichever pin or pins the bowler is trying to knock down. Of course, if it's you know, the first ball, they're trying to get it in the pocket and get a strike. But if they're trying to pick up a spare, they have to get that ball to go a different way. They have to get it to go to a different place. They have to get it to go at a different speed. Now, the way that they get there, right? They're not born that way. It's not an ability. It's a skill that they've learned, and they learn it through practice. They learn it through practice. They practice standing on different dots. What happens if I move over one dot to the left? What happens if I move over one dot to the right? What happens if I release the ball and it goes over this arrow as opposed to that arrow or that mark? What happens if I release the ball and I spin it half as hard as I usually, or twice as hard as I usually do? Can I observe which way it goes? And they're constantly getting that feedback during practice while they are practicing. They're constantly getting that feedback. So they know how to make that ball go wherever they want it to go on that lane. Now mind you, each lane is going to be different. They're going to be waxed differently. They're going to be buffed differently. And it takes the bowler a little while to figure out how this particular lane fits in with their previous experience. But through practice, through feedback, through technique, they develop the ability to put that ball wherever they want to put it. In similar fashion, Jack Nicklaus wrote in his book, Golf My Way, he was talking about learning how to play golf. And he said, if you really want to learn how to play golf and play well like a pro, he says, get a 5-iron. And he said the 5-iron would be the one you start with because it's right in the mid-range of the length of the clubs, 1 being longest, 9 being the shortest. Get the 5-iron. Just the 5-iron, that's all you need. Go to the range and stand there at the range and hit thousands and thousands and thousands of practice balls until you can put the ball anywhere on that golf range that the 5-iron is capable of reaching. He says when you're confident that you can put that ball anywhere you want to with the 5-iron, then go to a 4-iron. and do thousands and thousands and thousands of balls, and then when you can do it with the 4-iron, go to the 6-iron. And his whole idea was that after you have hit thousands of golf balls, and after you can put that ball anywhere on the range within the capability from the 1-iron all the way to the 9-iron, because they each have a different length and capability. Once you can put that ball anywhere you want to go, then and only then do you go out and play around the golf. Now, if we go back to the bowlers, and if you watch the pro bowlers, when I used to watch them as a teenager, because I would watch them and I would try to learn, and then I would try to go the next time our team had a game, I would try to go and see if I could improve my game. If you watch the pro bowlers, when they release that ball, they usually just stand there and watch it, waiting for feedback. But every once in a while, they let that ball go, and they know. They know exactly where it's going to go. They know exactly what it's going to do. They know that they have laid down the shot that they wanted to make, and they turn their back to the pins. They turn around, they walk back away, and there's a determination and a confidence in that walk. It's not a dejected walk at all. They're coming back, and they take that fist, they clench their fist, and they pump down into I got it. And then you hear the ball hit the pins. You hear the pins explode, and the X goes up on the scoreboard. They knew it. They knew it. There was no need to try to tweak it along with body English. There was no need to wish, will, or hope that by waving our hands in the air, that somehow we were going to get the laws of physics to change and get the ball to come back out of the gutter and jump up and hit the pins. They knew the moment they released that ball that they had done everything that was required. That, my friends, is surrender. That is release. And that is the end point that we want to get to in our spiritual practice. When we do our affirmative prayer, when we do our treatment, we are not begging, we are not pleading, we are not beseeching, we are not wishing, we are not willing, we are not hoping. We are knowing. We have faith. We have trust. And our goal is to have such complete belief, complete trust, complete faith that we surrender. That we surrender. Just as certainly as we know that if we stood on the top of a tall building and we released a penny, that it would go to the ground. We know that we have released our word into the law, and the law cannot say no. The law cannot say no. But unlike that bowling ball, which no matter how it appears with the little ones miraculously bringing it back from the gutter, the body English does not change the laws of physics and momentum, and the ball will go where it was going to go. If we try to apply body English to our treatment after we released it, it is like digging up the potatoes. We are undoing our belief. We are undoing what we have already done. Emmett Fox tells us very clearly, turn your mind entirely away from the problem and turn towards God. Change your mind and keep it changed. And that, for many of us, is the difficult part of the whole proposition. We change our minds, we release our treatment to the law, And the next day we say, gee, I wonder if it's working. I wonder if I need to do something else. Did I do that right? Maybe there's more that I need to do. Now, the only reason that these doubts, these worries, these concerns could possibly come to our mind is that we didn't have the complete faith that would allow us to surrender. In other words, there are symptoms. There are symptoms of the fact that our faith was not yet complete. And that's okay. That happens. You know, this is the point I'm trying to get to. Is that faith is a skill, if you want to think it that way, and instead of an ability. Now, if you want to see something funny, go to YouTube and search for skills versus abilities, and you will hear some human resource people trying to explain the difference. Apparently, I don't remember it being this way when I was managing back in the day. But apparently now, you know, skills and abilities, when people go for job interviews and when they get their annual performance reviews, the managers have to sort out skills and abilities. And when people are filling out their resumes, they have to sort out skills and abilities. And it occurred to me, I saw something and it came up, and I said, well, what do they really mean by the difference? I don't know that I know the difference between a skill and an ability. And to me, they seem to be very much the same. So anyway, there's quite a few videos where people try to explain the difference, and the more they try to explain it, the more they're proving that either they don't understand it or there isn't much of a difference. And I only say that because most of the things that they specified as abilities were things that I could learn. So typically they say that what is an ability is kind of a natural talent, and what is a skill is something that you've learned. So, for example, one person gave an example as an ability, the ability to learn foreign languages quickly. And I'm thinking, well, you could learn how to learn foreign languages quickly. You know, you can learn how to speed read. You can learn how to learn foreign languages quickly. It's something that you can be taught to do. So, in my mind, in my way of thinking, here's where I came down, just so you understand. And the example I used was Chuck Yeager, the test pilot. And of course, you know that I love to fly and I love airplanes. And Chuck Yeager was, of course, I read his biography and knew about him from history and everything. He was the first human being to fly faster than the speed of sound here in the United States. Well, he was in the world, but he did it here in the United States. And by all accounts of his peers, you know, Chuck Yeager was an exceptional pilot. He was just great. And one of his colleagues, one of his squadron mates during the Second World War, said the reason Chuck was such a great pilot was he had exceptional eyesight. Chuck's uncorrected vision was 20/15, which means he could see much better than most of us. And his ability, his natural ability to see, was so great that he could see targets, he could see dangers, he could see enemies, he could see things before anybody else in the squadron could see them. And he would tell them something's going on, and he would tell them, look out your window over that way. There's something going on over there. We need to take a certain action. And Chris, this gentleman who was relating the story, said he looked out his window, he couldn't see anything. But he kept looking, and then sure enough, after a couple minutes, whatever the danger or the opportunity that Yeager was pointing out was there, they could see it. So the ability to see was a natural ability. Flying the airplane was a skill that was learned. Now, I only say that because sometimes we think that faith is something you're born with. Faith is an ability. The great saviors, the great saints, you know, the great teachers of the world, they must have been just born somehow with this great faith. And it's possible, you know, it's possible, since we don't know where we were before we got here, it's certainly possible that we each come into the world with a different degree of faith. But I think we learned it somewhere. I think we developed it somewhere. And whether we did or we didn't, that's not the point. The point is, well, what are we going to do about it now? And the thing to remember is that faith is something that we can learn to develop. There is a step-by-step process by which we can develop our faith. Treatment is a spiritual practice that helps us to develop our faith. And it helps us in two ways. Not only is the process or the activity of treating, not only does that in itself help us to build our faith, because we're starting out by reminding ourselves, well, what do I know about God? And how does that apply to me? And as I did in the opening treatment, if we know that God is all-powerful and all-knowing, and God has created me out of myself, I am part of that, then I can be confident that the power and the wisdom to know what to do and to do what needs to be done is right here with me. I don't have to go out and make it. I don't have to force it. I don't have to tweak it. I don't have to give it my body English to push it along. I'm not asking God to do anything that God wouldn't have already done. I'm simply learning how gravity works and how to drop my penny. I'm simply learning how this law works and how to set it in motion. And the other thing that treatment does is it does in fact set that law in motion for us. So while the law of gravity, even though we don't understand exactly what gravity is, we understand something of how it works. It acts as a force that attracts things together. The law of mind acts as a force to produce changes in our consciousness. So when we do our treatment, the very act of treating is helping us to build faith. And the very action of the law as a result of our treatment is helping us to build faith. So let's look quickly at kind of the steps involved, because you hear things, you hear people use words interchangeably, and that's what I love about our language. If you go to the dictionary and look up definitions, you'll never know what anybody's talking about, because it's really kind of impossible until you get the context, because words have so many different meanings. And just as a totally unrelated side note is, when you go back to 2,000 years ago in Palestine, when Jesus was there and Aramaic was the primary spoken language, they only had 4,000 words in the vocabulary. And they didn't have any written vowels. So they wrote consonants and they put little marks around them called dots and jittles. And each word could have multiple meanings. So for us today in this country to try to take something that was written in Aramaic several thousand years ago and think we can understand it without understanding the context in which it was uttered, which it was written, the people for whom it was written, the people who spoke it, is kind of ridiculous. But in the English language, even though we have a lot more words today, it is not much different. The dictionary defines words in terms of each other. So we start with hope. And hope is kind of a wishing, a wanting, a gee, wouldn't it be nice kind of thing, or I hope that's true. You ask children, Santa Claus going to bring you what you want for Christmas? Well, I hope so. I sure hope so. It's kind of like a desire, okay? It's a desire that we want it to be that way. We would like it to be that way. Wouldn't it be nice if it were that way? So desire is our starting point, desire. We have to acknowledge that. We have to be very clear about that. Because we get a conflicting message. We're told that you shouldn't have any desires, that we should empty ourselves of all desires. And there's truth to that. We may not know how to get there, but there's some truth to that. But the downside of that is we say, well, I shouldn't desire anything. And yet desire, as Napoleon Hill tells us in his work, desire is the starting point of all achievement. And as a teacher once pointed out to us, if you want to be free of all desire, then you desire to be free of desire, and you're not free of desire. So is the desire to be free of desire a bad thing because you're supposed to be free of desire? Or is it a good thing because being free of desire is a good thing? And Chris, when he said that, I just kind of dropped my jaw open and said, huh. So we have to understand this fact that, first of all, our lives move according to desire. But not all desires are good desires, and not all desires are bad desires. And really it's kind of a matter of sorting out which desires we should pursue and which desires we should not pursue until we get to the point where there are no desires. Okay? So it's like the razor's edge. The intellect can tell us that there's something beyond the intellect, but the intellect can't take us there because it's beyond the intellect. But because we know it's there, we can head towards it until the intellect is gone. Our desire can tell us that there's a place where desires fall off as well. But desire is kind of a motive force to help us move in that direction until we no longer need it. Right? So there's a time and a place where it's appropriate. And then there's a time and a place where we no longer need it. But if we're pretending that we're already there and we no longer need it, and we're not, now we've got ourselves stuck. We've got ourselves in a pickle. So we start by acknowledging, as Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us, there's a good for me in the universe and I ought to have it. There's a good for me and I ought to have it. She says everything in God's universe is motivated by its desire for good, by its belief that there is a good that it ought to have. Our hunger is a belief that there's a good for us called food and we ought to have it, a desire for food that we ought to have. Our thirst is a desire for our good in the terms of water and in terms of drinking. If you hold your breath, you will desire to breathe. There's a good in the universe for you and it's called breathing, and you ought to have it. And loving, and being, and learning, and growing. All of these things are good. And Dr. Holmes just gave us a very simple test. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago when I said don't make it so hard. Does this thing I desire give a greater expression to life or love or truth or beauty? You should answer yes to one of those, if not all. And does it rob or harm anyone? And you should answer no to both of those. And if that desire passes that very simple test that he gave us, it's for the highest good of all, is an easier way of saying it, then the entire universe is for us and none of the universe is against us. So we start with this thing that we call a want, and we hope that we could have that want, you know. I'm a little hungry. I hope there's something good to eat in the fridge. I'm a little thirsty. I hope there's something cold to drink in the fridge. You know. I'm a little bit bored. I hope there's something good to watch on TV tonight. You know. I'm a little bit lonely. I hope there's somebody to talk to keep me company. We have these desires, we have these wants, and we start out with a hope. Now just hoping doesn't really do a whole lot for us in terms of putting the spiritual law in motion. But we have to acknowledge it's the starting place. Now we move from hope to belief. Now belief is kind of an acceptance. We accept the possibility that it's there. We believe it's there. I believe there's some leftover lasagna in the fridge. You know. I believe that there's a bottle of ice water in the fridge. I believe that. We start to accept the possibility. This is what we call belief. But belief in our language, in the way we use it, is not yet a certainty. Belief implies the possibility that it could be wrong, you know. Do you believe so-and-so will win the next election? Well, I believe he will, or I believe he won't, or I believe she will, or I believe she won't. There's a possibility they won't. But belief is kind of a notch up from hope. Hope is kind of a desire and a wanting, and gee, wouldn't it be nice? Belief is, hey, it's possible. I believe I can. I believe we can do that, see. And then the important step that comes next, before we get to faith, the important step is trust. We have to trust. We have to know. We have to know that there's something there to trust. Because if we don't trust, we'll never get to faith. Faith, as we describe it, faith is a knowingness so certain that the opposite point of view cannot even arise, you know. When you get out of bed in the morning, you never wonder if gravity is going to hold you to the floor when you stand up. You know, there's no possibility. That's complete faith. But you didn't get there overnight. You probably got there in such a gradual manner that you don't even know how you got there. But through the experience of your lifetime of over and over and over and over getting up out of bed in the morning and putting your feet on the floor, through the experience of tossing a ball up in the air and watching it come back down to earth, through practice, you came to accept beyond a doubt that gravity existed. You have faith and you trust in it. So we have to come to this point then in our spiritual practice of trusting. Well, how can I develop trust, you know? Well, you have to practice. You practice using the law. Right? Just like you would practice bowling or practice hitting a golf ball, you practice with your treatment. He calls us practitioners. We are practicing our ability to work with that power by which it is done unto us according to our belief. We read. See, if you have to wonder something like Wilbur and Orville taught themselves how to fly the airplane. People were trying to fly airplanes before that, and they were killing themselves. And Wilbur and Orville learned how to fly the airplane, and they managed to not kill themselves. But there was nobody to teach them. They might be able to draw from the experience of those who had gone before them, mostly in Europe, glider pilots like Otto Lilienthal and people like that. They might have been able to learn and to draw from their experience. But when it came to getting on that Wright Flyer down at Kitty Hawk and controlling it and staying alive, that was something that they had to teach themselves. So they were the first ones. But once they were able to do that, then they were able to begin instructing others and teach other people how to fly the plane. And from a business point of view, they needed to do that so they could sell them, right? No sense selling an airplane that people couldn't fly them. They had to not only sell a plane, but they had to teach them to fly. Similar fashion many years ago, car dealerships gave free driving lessons, right? If you wanted to sell a car, you had to teach people to drive. So we look at others who have gone before us. What can we learn from them? What can we learn from the deep spiritual thinkers of all time? What can we learn from the words of Jesus when he said, "It is done unto you according to your belief"? What can we learn from the Stoics when they tell us what the mind can conceive, the mind can achieve? What can we learn from the Buddhists when they tell us that everything you have experienced is a result of what you have thought? What can we learn from the philosophers that tell us once you have committed yourself, it's like invisible laws have come to your side? Whatever you can do or dream, begin at once. Begin at once. So there are people who have gone before us, and we can look to them and we can look at what they're telling us, and the first thing we can do is we can believe that it is possible. We can trust that it is possible. And then the second step in that is then we have to believe that it's possible for us, right? It's not good enough for me to believe that Jesus could do it, but nobody else can. If I want to use that same power by which it is done unto me according to my belief, I have to believe I can. So this is where I have to start to practice. So in terms of the bowling analogy that I use, we have to find a spot where we're going to stand. We have to know how many steps to take to the foul line. We have to practice using the spiritual law so that we get the feedback that comes back and tells us when it works. Now, as we are doing this, we are moving through trust. Not only do I trust that there's a power in the universe that responds to me according to my belief. Right? I might start out hoping there is. I might start out believing by accepting the possibility that there is, but now I'm starting to trust that there is. Right? I've seen other people use it. I've seen other people do it. I've looked for the evidence that changing your thinking can change your life. If you want more evidence, I recommend Dr. Dean Radin's book, The Conscious Universe. Just read through that. It bored me to tears because it's all mathematical statistics and I don't understand a bit of it. But he went through, I'll just give you one example. He went through and he said that years ago they were studying the possibility that taking an 80 milligram aspirin a day was good therapy for people who had had a heart attack. And he said during that clinical trial, the evidence that taking an 80 milligram aspirin every day was beneficial, the evidence was so overwhelming that they canceled the trial and immediately told doctors to start prescribing it. Their reasoning was that to withhold the information of the effectiveness of aspirin in order to complete the trial that they had laid out, it would not have been in the best interest of the patients. And Radin lays out the statistical case that the benefits of prayer in healing are far greater than the benefits of taking an 80 milligram aspirin for those who have had a heart attack. Yet science is not prepared to go tell doctors to prescribe prayer. And I have to approach that with a little bit of caution because I don't think all prayer is the same, right? Are you begging, pleading, beseeching, or are you knowing that there's a power in the universe that you are turning this intention over to? But nevertheless, if you need to trust, you can read, you can study, you can hang out with people who do trust. And then you have to begin. At some point you have to begin. You have to know that you can do it. You can do it. You don't need others to do it for you. You can do it. Others can help you along the way. Your practitioner, your minister can help you until you develop the trust in your own ability, your own talent, your own skill to do so. But at some point you have to do it. At some point you have to declare to yourself that this is my intention. This is my intention to truly use this power, to truly demonstrate that it's there. That's why he calls it a demonstration. That's why Ernest Holmes called it a demonstration. We're demonstrating the power. We're demonstrating the law. We desire to do that. As we do that, as we study, as we learn, as we hang out with like-minded people, as we practice, as we do our diligence, we start to see the change occur in our lives. We start to know that there's a power there. And then we can get to the point where we cease to resist. We do our treatment, we release it. Like Earl Anthony, we turn around, we clench our fist, we pump it. It's good. This one's good. This one's good. This one's going right where I wanted it. It is done. Now suppose the next day you get out of bed and you're not so sure. The ball is still rolling down the lane and you're not so sure. You were sure yesterday when you let it go. Today, you may doubt a little bit. And Emmett Fox gives us the answer. Treat the treatment. Treat the treatment. Treat yourself to know that what you did yesterday was good enough. Treat yourself to know that that treatment is unfolding, that that ball is still rolling down the alley exactly where you told it to go. And that anything within you that doubts that that treatment is working is now dissolved into the nothingness from which it came. Book of Genesis, the book of Genesis kind of describes this process to us in the terms that were appropriate for the context of people 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. In the beginning there was the void and the chaos and the nothingness and the blackness. And the Spirit of God moved upon the waters and said, "Let there be." And there was. It doesn't tell us that God was surprised. It doesn't tell us that God did anything else after God said, "Let there be." God didn't say, "Holy mackerel, did you see that?" God didn't say, "Maybe I need to help it along. Maybe I need to do something else. Maybe I need to give it some heavenly body English." A knowing so certain it is done that anything to the opposite cannot enter our minds. That's complete faith. We start with hope. We move to belief. We develop trust. We arrive at faith. And we surrender. And that, my friends, is the secret of life, right there. No matter what your desire is, no matter what your want is, that process can get you there. The rest is up to you. And so it is.